Hey guys, this is Chris, and today we will be playing a little bit of Civ 5. This may be a surprise to you guys, since I've only ever played Magic on the channel as far as games go, but I do want to play some more games, and considering that it's a weekend, I thought I'd be able to get out a few videos. This is going to be the first part of a Civ game. As you can see from the footage on screen, I ended up rolling the Inca, which is a pretty strong Civ. Like Magic, I'm not exactly the best Civ player in the world, but we're gonna see how far we can go. We're on a small map, 4 other players, 3 AI. I think we should be able to have a pretty fun game. We're playing, I believe, on Emperor. I think we're 2 steps down from Deity. That being said, I'm not very good at Civ most of the time. So we're going to try to get through this series with relative ease. I don't know how well it'll go, but these will just be a couple of bonus videos on the weekend. And, as the channel goes forward, I might end up doing more games. About to say, right now, we're going to get a new computer so that we can record some more complicated games, but Civ and Magic pretty much make up the repertoire of games that I like to play for fun. And as you can see from my setup here, I don't go for building a building first. I generally go for building a monument, not a monument, 2 scouts first, so that way I can see more of the map. Although when I was playing this, I wasn't really thinking about how to play the game optimally. I was more thinking about, is OBS going to crash and will this actually work out? Surprisingly, it held up pretty well, considering. So I just have my warrior out there scouting around, trying to find other civilizations, seeing who my closest neighbor is, what locations I should try to get cities around, and just general things like that. So with that border, we have discovered our first neighbor. It's Japan. I suppose that speaks a little bit how much I've played of Civ 5. It's a really fun game. If you haven't tried it, you should. It's a little dense to get into, and you need a lot of time to actually get through a game. But because we're just doing this like couple 2 episodes over the weekend, only took about an hour. So there's a lot more of this left, and I'd be interested to see if people want to see this type of content, but I enjoy it, so we'll probably do a little bit more in the future. Cusco has grown. That's always a good sign. Big cities generally means big science, which generally means you're winning. Civ 5 is a little bit snowbally like that, where if you have the right amount of science, you will win the game regardless of what anybody else is doing. Now, because we're playing against the AI, that's a little bit harder to pull off. Because unlike human players, the AI kind of has to cheat in order to be more difficult. So when you're playing against the AI in this game, which I assume most people do because it's a pretty big single-player game, the AI gets certain advantages at the beginning of the game that allow them to kind of snowball science, military, and culture a little bit better than regular players. Still working on our monument. This game is always a little hard to commentate over because there are a lot of downtimes where not a lot's happening. And we just put our warrior on auto explore. That should give us a little more freedom of movement because every turn it asks you what you want to do with your warrior, and that does get a little old eventually. It's nice to have auto explore and auto improve. But if I never played Civ 4, so I don't actually know if they had those features, but Civ 5 I've played a lot of, and by the end of the game you have at least 10-15 units that are either not auto exploring anymore because you should have the map figured out by then, but auto improving your things. A little bit after a while it just starts to become tedious. discovered a ruin. That's a good sign. That'll mean that nobody else has really been in this area yet. So, of the 4 players in the game, we know that we are in the game with Cusco. Japan's in the game, which, being our closest neighbor, isn't the best for us. Don't get me wrong. I like the Japanese civ in the game, but it is a little bit more aggressive than I would like for a neighbor. Their special ability allows them to continue to fight at full strength even when their units are damaged. And because the AI doesn't really do anything to help preserve their units so they can stack up promotions, they tend to get wounded a lot, and that means that they'll be able to fight a little bit harder because their units will still hit. Taking a quick look at some of the other features in it, that was the culture tree back there. Culture is really interesting in this game. Before Brave New World came out, you had culture in the game being one of the win conditions by itself, to where if you filled out enough of the culture projects and then culture trees, and then you built the Utopia project, you were able to just get a culture victory. With Brave New World, that changed to tourism, which we might be able to see a little bit later in the game. These first 2 videos that we're going to put out on this probably won't show it, because in the early game, really all you're trying to do is get science, get money, and then get units. One of the things that I'm always pretty bad at in Civ games is getting a strong enough standing army that the AI decides that it doesn't want to mess with me, but also not overproducing units. Because I have played long spiraling games of Civ where I'll basically just have 60 units and there's no reason not to go to war, so I just end up going to war for pretty much the entire game. And those kind of games can be a slog too, and you can bankrupt yourself, which will in turn affect your science. So there definitely is such a thing as too much war in Civ 5, but Civ 5 is kind of the war game. It does have some pretty decent combat. We're making good time here with the turns. We get our first policy. In Brave New World, it's pretty much always right to go tradition, at least if you want to be lazy like me and just choose the tree that's going to give you the most immediate benefits in the future. Honestly, like I said, I'm not the best at Civ, but I have played enough of it that I do kind of know what I'm doing. So unlike, I also have played Magic enough that I should know what I'm doing, but I still make misplays in that, and I'm doubtlessly still making misplays here as well. Discovering city-states is always pretty good too. It gives you 30 gold, and if you get a big enough army, you can bully them later. Although, on the harder difficulties in single player, it's a little bit harder to actually bully the AI, because the AI also has really big armies, so you have to have an army that's comparable to the army that's protecting them. And because the AI really likes to just go and say that they're going to protect all the city-states, it's a little bit difficult to actually reach a point where you can bully city-states under the protection of the AI. Still just exploring. Like I said, the first part of this game is always just exploring. I don't know why, but I tend to prefer the early game, but not just in Civ, but in most games in general. I'm about to say I'm a big fan of RPGs like Skyrim, Oblivion, Morrowind, and in all those games, I tend to prefer the early game. I've built some stupidly powerful characters in those games, but by the time I got to the late game, it's pretty much a slog as opposed to the more exciting, more exploring times. Now in games like Morrowind, that's a little bit less of a problem because you kind of feel like you've earned that sense of power that your character has. But in other games, it's a little bit harder to settle with. And I think Civ is one of those games. Like, if you play a game of Civ and pretty much you just sit there and turtle and the AI doesn't do anything and you're just waiting things out, it can get pretty boring by the end of it. And I definitely have had games of Civ where I've just abandoned the game because I thought, I could stick this out for another 100 turns, but I have the most science. I'm probably going to win anyways. There's just not a lot of fun in sticking around it after that point. So I'm hoping that this game won't turn out like that. You never know. Because as with all Civ-related things, it's a bit of a toss-up, and I've definitely had both. I've had games where, especially on some of the harder difficulties, where the AI gets a little bit more advantage. I've had games where the AI does something to undermine me, or just tilts me so far that I'm fully invested in seeing another civilization burn, and that is something that sounds morbid, but it's honestly one of the funnest parts of Civilization. Okay, we got our first worker out. Generally, if you want to play Civ, you probably shouldn't build your first worker. You should probably steal it off a city-state, but I didn't remember that at this point. And it's been a while since I've played a game of Civ, so it's going back is almost like a trial of remembering things. Time to adopt another policy. Let's see what we have on the... Yeah, just continuing down the tradition tree. That's probably the best choice. I'd say Civ 5 has a lot of really cool features and a lot of really fun ways to play the game. I think the victory type I have done the most is probably science victory, because that's pretty straightforward compared to some of the other things you need to do. Yeah, trying to get out these luxury resources so that we can actually start settling cities. We're a little behind on that, actually. So with a tradition build, one of the things that you want to do early on is get up 4 cities. Now, when you're building cities, one of the most important things that you want to try to remember, or that I try to remember anyway, is that each city has to be able to sustain itself on the basis of happiness. And that may seem like something that's easy to do, but it's a little tricky if you don't have things like a unique luxury resource in each city, if it doesn't have a good enough production to actually build happiness buildings. So there is a little bit of strategy into picking the right locations for your cities. But generally you can put a city down almost anywhere and make it viable if you put enough work into it, and if you have a decent starting location. So there's a lot of different factors that go into Civ. Like, looking at my civilization at the moment, we're in a jungle. We have 3 luxuries within the reach of our capital. So we're going to have sugar, gold, and marble over there off the corner. All of those are pretty good. Marble is actually really good for if you want to play on harder difficulties, because marble gives you a bonus to the production of wonders. So you can use that to try to get out one of these powerful early game wonders that normally the AI would snatch up because they're a tech level ahead of you. I don't think I end up doing this at this time because it is 3.5 tiles out from my capital. So it's not like I'm going to reach it anytime soon. So I'm just going for scouts at this point. I'd say the city to settler ratio is you generally want to get up to at least 3 population before you start building another settler. It's not a rule of thumb, but it's generally the best way that you can get out a settler in the fastest amount of time possible. Now, I haven't been keeping close watch on Oda down there with Japan. I doubt he's going to try anything this early in the game, but it's always better to be safe. And there also are barbarians around, which is why you always see me trying to move around units like workers and settlers with a unit on top of them. That's just so that the unit can't actually get stolen. Now down here in the south, I see that my spearman has auto-explored into a death trap. The AI in Civ is really special in that it finds ways to kill itself when you take your eyes off it for even a moment. And normally losing that spearman would be something that would be irking me a little bit, but I mean, it's Civ. These things happen, and it's not as though I have the 10, 15 turns to actually bring him back home. If something happens, he's not going to be of any help, so I guess we're just going to cut our losses with that little spearman. Especially since we already have another worker at home, another warrior at home. Cusco grows to 4. I think at this point we're going to start changing over to settlers. But I don't remember what we do. Oh, we go down and check out the spearman. He's in a really bad spot. Honestly, I should have just insta-healed him. But I thought maybe he could take another hit, especially with an open range promotion. Get the worker started on building a farm. Going for trapping. Don't remember why, but I'm guessing it has something to do with the luxuries. Honestly, the first 20, 30 turns of the game is just trying to get up your luxuries as fast as possible so you can settle as fast as possible. Looking around, see a couple barbarians out there. You can actually turn off barbarians in the setting if you don't want to deal with that kind of thing. Generally, I leave them on, but I have played a lot of games with them off, and the difference is mainly in the amount of protection you have to invest in. So if the barbarians are off, you don't need a unit on top of all your civilian units. So we're up to 7 science. We're minus gold, which isn't good, but it's to be expected in the early game. We can probably keep ourselves afloat by just continuing to meet city-states and continuing to just protect our units and build improvements. Because most luxuries will give you gold back. Hey, we've met our second player in the game. That was England. England is also a really strong civ. I haven't really talked about the relative strengths of the civs. Cusco, I mean the Inca, with a good mountain range next to them, is a top tier civ. So we kind of lucked out on our random roll there. Japan isn't too powerful of a civ. They get some bonuses for fishing boats, and they have the samurai warrior, and they also have the combat bonus I talked about earlier. But other than that, they're not the strongest. Cusco's unique units are the slinger, which is an earlier archer, and they also have the terrace farm, which is really powerful. The terrace farm gives a food bonus for each adjacent mountain tile, which for us actually being near this little mountain range here is pretty good. I'd say one of the only games I've actually won against the AI deity was with Cusco on a mountainous map, because the terrace farms are insane if you can get them next to a few mountains. The population growth is mind-boggling. Alright, we got our scouts out exploring. Generally a good thing. So, when you meet a cityscape, you'll get gold based on whether you're the first person to meet it or whether you're the second person to meet it. So, If you're the first person to meet it, you'll get 30 gold, but every person after that only gets 15 gold. So that can tell you whether or not another player is near, whether or not the area that you're going into has already been explored, and if the area is worth exploring or worth investing time into. Now, barbarians will try to steal workers. They'll also try to steal settlers if they're unprotected. Generally, a human player would always have their settlers and warriors settlers and workers protected, but the AI sometimes won't, or sometimes they'll move them protected by another unit, but they won't have the protection unit directly on their unit, and that will end up getting their unit lost. Got a good old barbarian kill there by the capital. So at this point in the game, we're building settlers. We're basically going to spam out 3 settlers and settle 3 cities. Judging from the area we have explored, there's enough unique luxuries around that we could conceivably get a good 4-city layout and then start working up towards our national college, which is basically the end goal of getting our 4 cities out as quickly as possible. If we get to our national college quick enough, we can get to universities in short order right after that, and 4 cities with a national college built and some universities up before turn 100. Pretty good start for a game of Civ. And as these turns tick away, we're just still exploring. I should mention now that I might end up doing some other things with the series as time goes on. More editing, more complex things to keep the series more streamlined. Right now it's just going to be 30-minute episodes, or as close to 30-minute episodes as I got with my recording. So we have about 10 minutes left. We're working towards our first settler, which is good. We're building improvements. We haven't got any luxuries up, which is really slow. But I honestly don't think that'll be too much of a problem. I'd really like to get down a city directly to the southwest of my capital, all the way down there on the coast by Japan. If we can do that, we can kind of stop them from expanding by using our border growth. And that's a good way to get an AI out of the game. Because if you can get them hemmed in really well, they won't actually be able to settle until they can get around your borders. And if they're a civ that doesn't know sailing or deep sea sailing very quickly, you can keep them pinned in for like 50 turns. And during that time, they'll still be building settlers because their AI tells them that they need to settle more cities, but they won't actually have room to settle those cities, or they'll settle those cities in suboptimal places. And that's just really good for you, because later on when the AI decides, I don't like you, you've settled too close to me, I covet things that you own, they won't actually be strong enough to actually fight you. So there's a lot of little tinkering that you can do to get advantages over the AI. One of the advantages that I'm pretty sure I do at some point in the recording session, I don't know if I've already done it on the video yet, or if I will do it soon, because I might have missed it, I might have overlooked it, is that you can actually set a city that's building a settler to work all production tiles, and that'll mean that the city will get the hammers from those production tiles, but because the city is building a settler, it won't actually starve to death. So you can go into massive negative food while you're building settlers, because the city can't actually grow during that time anyway, so it won't actually starve. This area over there, just west of Cusco, seems to be pretty barbarian rich. It doesn't seem like the kind of place where we could easily get a settler without some kind of protection. Although, as I mentioned, the first city that I'm going to try to settle is the one to just cut off Japan. Because while I do think that Japan's probably going to end up a lot weaker than us in this game, I am a little worried that we're going to get into an early war with them and they're going to prove how bad I am at Civ. And I don't want that to happen, really. So we have our settler. We have a couple of units around that we're going to use to protect it. Now you might be able to see on the screen the little red minus next to the Cusco. That means the city is starving, but because we queued up another settler, it won't actually starve. So don't worry too much about that. Our Pantheon's giving us culture, which is allowing us to get out more tenants as quickly as possible. And we're just kind of waiting around. Trying to get our first city. You look over there in that barbarian camp, you can see that somebody has their settler captured. Probably Japan. Japan probably decided that they were going to forward settle us, and they went with no protection, and so they lost their unit. Honestly, serves them right, but we are not going to worry about that. So we're just moving our units around to make sure that we don't get jumped. Getting jumped by barbarians with only 2 scouts as protection could get our settler captured. Will it? I don't know, but better to have both of them around just to be safe. And we move one back to block, and then we move the full health one to protect. Because the scouts can move through terrain without being hindered, they tend to move a little faster than most units. And so it's easy for them to get ahead of things that they're escorting. I move my piece down, move my piece west to get my settler and scout on that hill. Japan just built the Great Library. That's a really good wonder. That makes me think that maybe at some point in the future I might want to go to war with Japan, because if I can take their capital, that wonder will be mine. So we end up settling. This location isn't the greatest, but it's protected. It allows us to start clearing out these barbarians. It's on a hill, which is always good. We have access to the truffles, and we might be able to disincentivize Japan from moving any further. Going for philosophy. Philosophy is the tech prerequisite to get the National College out. We move our scout out and guard. So you see with our city placement, we can actually attack the barbarian encampment, which is good for us. We move our warrior back. He needs to guard our home front, really, because we are probably really behind on military. So we just have our work begun on the settler. Well, we've been working on it for a while, but we have our luxury starting to come up. Sugar is a decent luxury. It's not the best luxury in the game, but beggars can't be choosers. We need happiness, especially if we're going to get out this 4-city plan like we want to. And if we can capture that settler, it'll actually turn into a worker, because it's not ours, which will enable us to have another worker. We're behind on workers too. Ideally, you want a worker for every city, which, since we're planning for 4, we should probably plan ahead to get all 4 workers, but we don't do that here. We're just going to try to roll with what we have. Japan, England, and whatever other civ is out there all choose something like liberty or piety, and we're the only tradition players. We're the only ones able to build the hanging gardens, which means the city we build it in will get +6 food, and that is great population growth. That'll lead us to good places, hopefully. Hopefully the people of Cusco are looked upon in this world as the heroes, not the villains. Hopefully we don't end up being the people that are stomping through everybody's land with giant death robots. But you know, there's a chance that we may end up being the Fire Nation. We may be the guys who are just like, our civilization is so great, we're going to go invade you and give it to you. It could happen. Not to say violence may be in our future. Well, that'll be part 1. Thank you guys for watching. About to say we're coming to a close here. So, thank you. Like, subscribe, and share the video. Bye.